If your thing back in the late 80s to early 90s was vertical or sideways scrolling shoot-'em-ups, you were spoiled for choice, because the market was flooded with them, to the point that some consoles even ran the risk of being characterised by the sheer prevalence of games in that genre that were available for them. A case in point would be the PC Engine, which has long been one of my favourite 8-bit consoles from that era, partly thanks to its comprehensive range of high-quality arcade conversions, among which there's no shortage of spaceship shooters. There are plenty of console original titles as well that clearly take their cues from the big-name arcade hits. This is the dinky little console that played host to the infamous Soldier series and Gunhead after all. So any similar game looking to enter such a crowded market had to be pretty confidently conceived to make its mark. The pressure to provide a unique selling point was as real back then as it is today. And that, conveniently, sets us up for discussion of Data East's Override, a 1990 Japanese exclusive game that may not be the flashiest or prettiest in the PC Engine's library, and certainly isn't the best, but surely sets out to do something a little bit different. At a glance, Override probably doesn't look like much, and in many respects, it's pretty much your standard, albeit good quality PC Engine shooter. The twist here is that, where most games like this see you stabbing the fire button until your thumb aches, in this one, staying your trigger finger reaps certain benefits as well. Going a few seconds without firing a shot causes your chunky tank of a spaceship to charge up a super destructive blast. You'll know it's ready to unleash when the ship starts flashing, whereupon the next tap of the fire button unloads all fiery hell on the enemy. That's pretty much where the innovation starts and ends with Override, but it's enough. Just about. Besides the charge shot gimmick, I feel like most of this game's mechanics are things I've seen before. As you fight through waves of enemy ships, canisters appear which release different pickups when you shoot them. A red P pickup powers up your standard shot, which you can do several times until your power level is maxed out. Coloured gems add one of several different satellite weapons alongside your regular shot. These gem pickups change colour every few seconds, and picking up one of the same type as your current weapon will beef it up a step. So far, so familiar. At least, I've definitely seen this power levelling system used in other Japanese shooters. But that's not a complaint, because it services Override and its energetic pace of play very well. Where the game breaks from the norm is that it doesn't deal in one-hit kills like most shooters. Rather, you get a 3-step energy bar. Each time you take a hit, that depletes one chunk of it, until you eventually explode in a ball of fiery death. But you can replenish it by picking up the blue E-gems that occasionally appear. You'll have to keep your eyes peeled for those though, because they crop up far less frequently than regular power-ups. I always think these kinds of games live or die on the strength of their core play mechanics. Like any game in an overstuffed genre, a good spaceship shooter needs to do something to keep its players engaged. Otherwise it just becomes a boring exercise in leaning on the fire button. And it certainly feels like that's a lesson Override's developers took to heart. It's just a bit of a shame that, in spite of their efforts to do something unique with the game, there are a few issues with it that conspire to keep it out of the big leagues. And these may seem minor, but they do paint a picture of a game that needed just a tiny bit more fine-tuning. First of all, to address an entirely superficial criticism, and this is, I'll be honest, a very subjective one, Override lacks wow factor. It's not an ugly game to look at by any stretch of the imagination, but I do find its visuals a bit bland. There are some really neat touches, like parallax scrolling backgrounds and enemy spaceships that fly out of craters and such, but hold Override up against other PC Engine shooters like the ones I mentioned earlier, and for my money, it just doesn't look as interesting. I'm a lot more concerned about certain aspects of the game's design that feel half-baked. The most noticeable for me is that there's a selectable speed setting for your ship that feels like a redundant feature. I found that I tended to stab the button once at the start of stage 1 on each play session, and then forget all about it. Boosting up to the third setting made the ship a bit too zippy for my liking, while the lowest setting left me with a ship that felt slightly too sluggish. In either case, that translated to accidental deaths, so I kept the ship in second gear at all times, and I never felt at any point like this speed-changing mechanic was something the game required me to use. That's a shame, because it feels like an opportunity to make things just a little bit more interesting might have been missed here. Being a vertically scrolling shooter of its time, Override does also suffer one of the common drawbacks of the genre. Making progress sometimes feels like a matter of maxing out your firepower and simply bashing your way through the enemy. Once your weapon of choice is fully powered up, you'll cut through oncoming spaceships, missiles and gun emplacements like a warm knife through butter. But once you lose a life and get reduced to using your basic shot again, you can find yourself easily overwhelmed. The game's inherently designed to minimise this problem thanks to dispensing with one-hit kills, and fresh power-ups are never too far away, but it can still be frustrating if you get caught out in the middle of a particularly relentless attack wave. In spite of all that though, I do think Override has that necessary quality that these kinds of games need to keep players interested. To an extent, progress is possible by memorising the attack patterns in each stage, but even then, the enemy puts up enough of a fight that you can't allow yourself a moment's complacency. You have to be alert at all times. This game really throws it at you, filling the screen with attacking enemies, many of whom spit out multiple shots. And by stage 4, where things start to get really tricky, you have ground level obstacles to worry about as well. Things get impressively busy, and it's a testament to how well this game was coded that it puts all this stuff on screen without a hint of sprite flicker or noticeable slowdown. It never plays less than smoothly. The action isn't flat out all the way though. At various points in each stage, the enemy onslaught does tend to noticeably abate. This is usually an unsubtle hint that you need to charge your super shot of ultra destruction to take out an approaching wave of enemies. But these lulls in the storm are a double-edged sword, sometimes serving to underscore the fact that the charge shot mechanic, while fun, isn't really implemented cleverly enough to truly dazzle. Even boss encounters tend to be built around a pattern of simply finding the correct time to use it, and once you do, dousing them with explosive space napalm just a few times is usually enough to send them packing. That kind of thing seems to characterise Override for me, making it feel like a game that's been made with a good deal of care, but just doesn't quite deliver the fresh, clever experience I get the impression its developers were aiming for. Override isn't necessarily going to set your world on fire, but it is a solid shooter with enough of a twist that it's worth playing. And while it may not be the most breathtakingly beautiful example of its kind, it certainly excels at doing the simple things well. My only unshakable reservation is that really, a bit more could have been done with its most interesting mechanics, because although they most definitely work, I get the sense that they could have been implemented better and fleshed out more. Had the game leaned on those ideas a bit more heavily, I dare say it could have turned out to be truly exceptional. I'm at pains to reiterate that what's on offer here is very good though, and fans of the genre will most assuredly find much to enjoy. Without a doubt, Override's got a certain charm about it. It's quite challenging, and its frenetic pace means you won't tire of it after just a couple of plays per session. I'm just not sure that I'd call it a must-have for PC Engine owners, unless they're on the lookout for something that's got a slightly different flavour to the console's best and more famous games of this ilk.